Hello and welcome to the France 24 interview. Our guest today is Thomas Piret, who is a lecturer at the University of Edinburgh and the author of a fascinating book that was just published in French and is about to be translated in English. The suggested title is State and Religion in Syria, the Ba'ath Party and the Ulemas. Obviously, the crisis has been escalating in Syria. The Arab League just suspended Syria. There is talk of economic, maybe political sanctions. The European Union is announcing more sanctions against the regime. The King of Jordan is suggesting that Bashar al-Assad step down. How do you see the situation? Do you think we are at a turning point?
I do think so, yeah. I think it's very serious. First because, the Arab League, of course, is not very powerful in itself, but in symbolic terms, it's extremely important. Syria has always, Syria is a founding member of the League. It has always presented itself as like the defender of Arab values. So being suspended is extremely serious. The declarations of the King of Jordan are also very important, not because of the influence of Jordan, which is a kind of lightweight in regional politics, but because the King of Jordan wouldn't speak that way if he was not backed by Saudi Arabia in particular. So it's a sign of a radical turn in Saudi politics towards Syria.
So the policy is now Bashar should go.
It looks like, yeah, that's what they've decided. Because they were probably hesitating between of course, they had no sympathy for the regime of Bashar al-Assad, but at the same time, they were maybe worried of a revolution or instability in the region. But now they seem to have decided for regime change in Syria.
So in concrete terms, what will it mean in coming weeks?
I think maybe not something tangible in concrete terms, but it will make it easier. For instance, it will provide a cover for Turkish moves, Turkish sanctions. The Turks were waiting for an Arab cover to move in terms of economic sanctions, maybe military. We don't know at this stage. And at the international level, it will be maybe easier to pressure Russia and China and other members in the United Nations once there is this Arab backing to sanctions against Syria.
Okay, I want to get to the core of your book, which is the role of the Sunni ulema, the clergy. Syria has a large Sunni majority, although it is led by the Assad dynasty, as you call it, which is an Alawite. There are very few senior ulemas who have taken a clear stance since the beginning of the repression in March. Very few have sided with the opposition. Why is that?
Okay, so actually, in the month of Ramadan, there was a kind of rise in number. They were getting increasingly vocal, and at that moment, the regime decided to silence them. So I would qualify, the fact that, things have changed since I finished the book, actually. But nevertheless, there is a significant proportion of this religious elite which is indeed siding with the regime. The reason for that is, two trends. One was measures that were specifically designed to please the clergy, like authorization for an increasing number of religious schools, of Islamic charities.
To gain their support, because this is a secular regime.
Absolutely, absolutely. And also, in an indirect way, over the last 10 years, the Syrian economy has been increasingly liberalized, which has entailed a rapprochement between the regime and the business community. And there is a very old and very close relation between these ulama, these men of religion, and the business community. So I would say that automatically, through this rapprochement with the economic elites, the regime also engaged in a rapprochement with the religious elites.
And so they're able to maintain their loyalty despite the fact that it's a secular regime, that it's not a Sunni-led regime.
Yeah, because there is, beyond this kind of Sunni identity, there are also what we could call class interests. The surprising in Syria is, the strongholds of the uprising are mostly in the suburbs, the countryside to a certain extent, small cities. And so I think that the bourgeoisie of the two main cities, Damascus and Aleppo, are a bit concerned about this kind of social dimension, social and economic dimension of the uprising. They're probably a bit afraid.
Including the ulemas.
Including the ulama, because they are like very closely related to these economic interests.
There is also the fear that is being waved by the regime in the past, but clearly now, of a foreign agenda, including an Islamist agenda. There's obviously a rich, if I may use the word, history of Islamist face-off between the regime and the Islamists in Syria. Is there a concern among the traditional clergy that there could be more radical Islamists taking over?
Yeah, probably. They're especially worried of the Salafi trend, because not so much for political reasons, but for religious reasons. I mean, the ulama in Syria, in their majority, they belong to the so-called traditionalist school. So they're very much opposed to the Salafi or Wahhabi brand of Islam. So they're probably concerned about the rise of this trend in Syria.
You write in your book that you think the fate of the regime, we talked about external pressure at the onset of the interview, but inside could be decided by the position of the clergy. Why is that? Why do you think they could, if they side strongly with the opposition, really tilt the balance?
Yeah, I think, but they will only do that once the economic elites decide to change sides. If the economic elites decide, okay, we can no longer live under this regime, I mean, our business is collapsing, they might turn against the regime. And in this case, I think the ulama will provide a kind of religious justification for that change of position.
But do you think that what's happening outside, we saw the Islamist Party arrive first in the elections in Tunisia, they are slated to perform rather well in Egypt, in Morocco. Does this have an impact on them internally in Syria?
At the moment, it's very hard to tell because, I mean, the context is so much different. I mean, nobody's, of course, speaking about elections at the moment.
Maybe, but influence, maybe.
Influence. Yeah, I mean, I think we can expect such an outcome if the regime collapses. I mean, a rise in the Islamic trend.
But could this encourage them to be more proactive against the regime, saying, "Okay, we are encouraged by what we see around us," or they're really cautious?
I think they will remain very cautious. As long as it's not very clear. If the regime remains able to defend itself, they will probably remain cautious.
I want to ask, you mentioned that there was, when Bashar al-Assad arrived in power in 2000, there was a period when, they found kind of more an accommodation. But since 2008, you said the regime has been cracking down on the traditional clergy. In the end, today, in retrospect, do you think this was maybe a fatal mistake by the regime, maybe to lose at least the total support of the clergy?
Maybe, yeah. I think maybe some of these, respected scholars who spoke against the regime from the start, these were one of their first criticisms. In the first week, it was not about politics, about human rights or democracy. They were very much, talking about these measures that had been taken against the interest of the religious elites. And I would say religious-minded people in general. So I wouldn't say that it would have completely guaranteed the support of the clergy, but it would have, probably lessened, criticisms.
Do you last question, do you think that there is within the Sunni clergy also a fear that putting forth too much the Sunni identity might create civil strife in Syria? This has also been a fear of the regime, but also of people in the region. Is there maybe a willingness to kind of restrain the clergy from speaking out maybe in a more vocal way?
Yeah, I mean, actually, we hear very different kind of discourses on the part of the Syrian clerics. Some of them, even in Homs, in the city of Homs, where the situation is really very difficult at the moment, where there is a kind of strife between Sunni and Alawite neighborhoods. We've heard one leading cleric of the city openly condemning the killing of Alawite citizens by Sunni militias. And so some of them are very much concerned and very trying to avert civil strife. Others, and especially there is a famous scholar a Syrian scholar based in Saudi Arabia, Adnan al-Arur, who has had a discourse which was, I mean, seen as very frightening by the Alawites. I mean, he was singling out the Alawite community and saying that the Alawites who have collaborated with the regime would be punished in the most cruel way after the revolution.
Okay, so we'll have to see how things unfold. They are changing every day in Syria. Thank you very much for your thoughts, Thomas Pierret, and thank you for watching this edition of The Interview here on France 24.